Thank you, sir. Well, Gilgit Baltistan has to go a long ways. Until 2009, there was complete censorship. There was no freedom of expression or political activity for the local people. Only Pakistani political parties were allowed to participate in the local council elections. And now there's a semblance of democracy, but still there should be more international pressure from different nations on Pakistan to grant freedom of expression and political activity to local people in Gilgit Baltistan. More than 180 people are behind bars facing sedition charges just because they want to talk about their religious or political rights. So advocacy is a very challenging topic, and it's a very difficult uphill task when it comes to Gilgit Baltistan.
Thank you. We've been joined by Congresswoman Donna Edwards from Maryland and Congressman Joe Pitts from Pennsylvania, who have been strong supporters of indigenous community rights at every level. And I want to turn this over to Congresswoman Edwards now, if I could.
Thank you very much, and I apologize I wasn't here for your earlier testimony, but I did have a chance to read it, and I think one of the concerns that I have is sort of what's the relationship between the migrations that are happening with indigenous people and things like human rights abuses as opposed to their economic circumstances, and I wonder if any of you could speak to that.
Well, in the case of Burma, yeah, it's sort of all wrapped up into one. You know, we have religious persecution, ethnic persecution, human rights abuses, mass atrocities, all tied up in potentially development projects and economic interests inside Burma. And so what we're seeing right now, first and foremost, is these building of hydropower plants in ethnic minority territories. And it's tied up in the regime wanting to get rid of its ethnic minority problem. And it's basically the regime is to protect the Chinese interests as well as annihilate their ethnic minority resistance, attacking these groups, ending ceasefires, and that for them, their military policy is human rights abuses. And so it's the raping of women, it's the destruction of villages, it's forced labor, it's human landmine sweepers. And so for us, in the case of Burma with its indigenous communities, it's basically a nightmare because it's everything wrapped up into one package that will result in their destruction.
And it's you know, not even behind, it's kind of in front of what purports to be an economic development kind of strategy, right?
And as you hear from some of the others, none of that will benefit any of these communities. It'll result in the destruction of these communities to benefit the Chinese or to benefit the state power.
And then I have a question that relates particularly to Burma and what can be done, looking at the programs from the UNHCR and what can be done either to strengthen or make those more effective, and what you've been able to see in terms of the UNHCR programs and what's happening with indigenous people.
Well, Burma is a unique case when it comes to UNHCR because the refugee population in Thailand, which is the longest standing refugee population, is controlled by an NGO consortium and not by UNHCR. They have a very limited role there. But the biggest problem there is that Thailand has not allowed refugee registration since 2005. More than half of the camp populations now are unregistered refugees. And so we have a dangerous situation where UNHCR really needs to be given the role to allow to register new refugees. In the case of Bangladesh, our biggest problem, again, is the Bangladeshi government not allowing UNHCR to register 200,000 unregistered refugees, which has resulted in them not receiving aid, which has resulted in them being subjected to periods of really vicious violence by local communities that resent their presence in those sort of like impoverished communities. In the case of, say, Malaysia, Indonesia, these other countries where you see the Rohingya going by boats and winding up on their shores, again, it becomes this process of the UNHCR not being allowed by the host governments to register these refugees. And so in the case of UNHCR, the biggest problem is needing countries like the United States to step in and say they need to be allowed to register new refugees. And so, because a lot of the times what's happening now is that numbers of refugee populations for Burma are being reported, and it's underreported, because UNHCR is not allowed to register these refugee populations, and then they are not afforded the protections and rights as official refugees and are not provided the level of humanitarian aid assistance that they need.
And then with respect to India, I didn't ask this earlier, but it's related. How much of India's desire to be part of the sort of at the forefront of the global economic community and is tied to its treatment of indigenous people?
So yes, migration happens also because of economic reasons, because of food insecurity, but the mass migrations are happening because of displacement. So the eastern part of India, where I am from, it has the largest amount of the soil in the form of minerals, but the people living there are the poorest. And the industries which are coming up, and the steel companies, the different mines, they've been around for the past 100 years, but more are being built still. And yes, that is part of India's plan to become a more successful country. And I don't think indigenous people are necessarily in conflict with development. They want to be developed as well. They want education, they want access to food and water and electricity and roads. But the problem is that when these mines are set up, these factories are set up, they are displaced and they are not rehabilitated, which means that they are not given equal compensation in terms of land, money, and retraining, because their primary occupation, if it was farming or collecting resources from the forest floor, that has been taken away and they don't have any new skills. So they essentially end up as landless laborers or doing construction work, etc. They might find employment in these new companies, but they are the lowest labor menial level. Hence, development does not happen for them, and they're left even more destitute than they were with their land before.
And with respect to Gilgit Baltistan, can you also tell me, as concerned as I am about the impact of economic development on the ability of indigenous people to participate both in the existing economy and not to be displaced, I get concerned that a policy that's related to our desire to have a stronger and more effective relationship with Pakistan results in not being as animated in terms of our consideration of the positions of those people. So can you describe for me, if you would, a way in which the United States could do what we need to do in terms of our relationship with Pakistan, but that doesn't have to jeopardize indigenous people?
Well, I believe that rather than having a long-term relationship with Pakistani military, United States government or the Congress or the society can have a long-term relationship with the people of Pakistan and understand the situation in areas where the minorities or the occupied people have been impacted. And Gilgit Baltistan is such one region which has remained concealed for almost 62 years because of Pakistan's own policies. And I think because of its proximity to China, Afghanistan, and India, and the nexus that we see between China and Pakistan, I think it's imperative for the United States to pay more attention to the needs of the indigenous people in Gilgit Baltistan. I also want to say a little bit about the migration issues. In 1974, Pakistan abolished a law which is called state subject rule that forbid Pakistanis or any foreigners to acquire immovable assets in Gilgit Baltistan. And since then, Pakistanis have been settling systematically in Gilgit Baltistan, changing the local demography. Pakistani militants, they attack local people, and they not only kill local people, but they displace them. And a lot of these internal displaced people have not been rehabilitated. And their lands have been taken by the Pakistani nationals. So there's a lot of issues that are important for the local people, and I do understand that United States has its own interest in Pakistan, given the geopolitical situation. And I think this is sort of a turning point where it will be more beneficial for the United States government as well as Congress to have a relationship with the communities there in Gilgit Baltistan.
Thank you very much, and I don't have any other questions. I will just say, in closing from my time, I think, as we recognize, every nation will claim that there are a lot of these issues that have to do exclusively with their internal affairs and working, and therefore the international community should take a step backwards. I do think that the United States, often we have to figure out what the appropriate balance is that's struck in our relationship with our other nations in protection of indigenous and other peoples from human rights abuses and violations that also run up against our own values. And while we do, in the case of Pakistan and India and a lot of places, have other external concerns, we have to take into consideration how we balance that with our desire to make sure that people are able to fulfill their aspirations as indigenous people. And with that, I would close. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I yield to Mr. Pitts, I'd like, Mr. Richardson, did you want to add something?
Just one quick point on the question about migration, a little bit less about the displacement of indigenous communities and more about the transmigration of ethnic majorities into traditionally indigenous areas. And here I would point to the extraordinary migration of Han Chinese into regions like Tibet and Xinjiang, and of Javanese into places like Papua, where one of the problematic aspects is not just that this is in pursuit of central government designed and imposed development models, but it's also almost always accompanied by an enormous security presence, very heavy military presences who tend to be, I think, disproportionately skeptical of the local population and contribute arguably more than any other dynamic, I think, to some of the discrimination that Ms. Eka very evocatively described. I mean, if you talk to members of the Indonesian military who have served in Papua, to hear them talk about Papuans is appalling. It is appalling. I mean, you will hear people be described as subhuman. And these are people who've been sent essentially to defend certain specific economic infrastructural investments, not to defend the population as a whole against deprivations of their rights. And I think that's seriously problematic and deserves a lot more attention from the U.S.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pitts?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing. I'll start with Ms. Quigley. I'm a little more familiar with Burma and the ethnic minorities there. What percentage of the population of Burma would be comprised of indigenous people or ethnic minorities?
About a third of the population.
Only 1/3?
Yeah, 1/3.
Now, in the tribal areas, the Karen, the Karani, the Arakan, the Mon, the Wa, the Chin, the Kachin areas, which area has the most severe repression by the Burmese government?
It would be the Rohingya. It would be the example in my testimony today.
Now, that is not an ethnic minority as far as a tribal area, is it?
It's a dispute, to be honest, whether or not.
And it is on the western side in the Chin area?
Yeah, it's just west of the Chin in Arakan State on the Bay of Bengal. So it borders the sea as well as in Bangladesh.
So you would say that's the most repressive?
It is. It is.
And what would be the second most repressive?
The Karen.
The Karen. And of the 30% of the population, do you have a number on internally displaced people in Burma? You know about how many?
The most accurate figures only really characterize the internally displaced on Burma's eastern and northern front, and so that would exclude the Chin and the Rohingya, and that number is about 600,000.
Of IDPs?
Of IDPs.
How many are refugees who've left the country and are on the border?
People think over 2 million if you count all the countries in which, so Bangladesh, Malaysia, Thailand, China, all the countries that they've gone to.